Well, folks, like Brother Stan told you, we are speaking today about something called destination addiction. And what we want to do is we want to find out how to keep destination addiction from stealing our joy. Dr. Robert Holden, he says this about destination addiction. He says, beware of destination addiction. It's a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is in the next place, the next job, or with the next partner. Until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be where you are. How powerful is that? Did you hear that? Until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be where you are. So what is destination addiction? Um, this is from an article called How to Keep Destination Addiction from Stealing Your Joy. And it says destination addiction is used to describe the belief that happiness is in the destination or can be found somewhere else rather than in the present. Dr. Latoya Gaines, a psychologist, she says this: as children, we are conditioned to think about our future. How often are we asked, what are you going to do when you grow up? Or we're told you have to get good grades so that you can find a good college or a good job. You know, we always hear stuff like that when we're growing up. And as a result, Dr. Gaines says this: our minds begin to shift towards this future orientation in which everything that we do is in service of some kind of future goal. Imagine if, as children, we were encouraged to just enjoy learning, or we were taught to just reflect on what made us happy during the day. The term destination addiction, it was actually coined by that British psychologist, Dr. Robert Holden, who I quoted in the beginning. And he says this: he defines destination addiction as a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is in the next place, the next job, or with the next partner, right? And in other words, destination addiction is this: it's your mind being overactive with this sort of grass is greener thoughts, like, um, what if I had married my spouse, and there's someone else better for me, right? You ever hear people say that? I once knew this gentleman, and he said, I really don't know if my marriage is going to work. And he'd been married for, I think at that point, like 15 years. And I said, well, why not? And he goes, well, I just don't feel like she's my soulmate. Well, and I thought to myself, what a ridiculous thought to have, you know? But that's what happens when you have something like destination addiction and that grass is greener mentality. Um, and I often think personally that the concept of a soulmate really leads to unhappiness in relationships, because anybody who has been in a long-term relationship or a marriage knows that relationships are up and they're down. Now, sometimes they're maybe a little bit more up than others, and sometimes they're maybe a little bit more down than others, but there's kind of an ebb and flow to relationships. But sometimes we think that mistakenly that if we don't feel those same butterflies, and if we don't feel, the same way that we did when we were courting and when we just met and we were so enamored with each other, that it must be because we made a mistake and we thought this was the one, but this isn't the one, and that my soulmate is out there somewhere. There is one person that God created for me that is perfect for me, and when I find that person, I'm going to be happy now and forevermore. And that is baloney. Okay, because what determines who you end up with is not really some metaphysical concept of a soulmate, some soulmate out there that you haven't met yet. It's literally proximity, right? I'm in the United States. I'm in San Francisco, California, and I met my wife in San Francisco, California. Now, had I grown up in Trenton, New Jersey, I probably would have married somebody from there. So it's really that simple. And I think we tend to overthink this stuff because we are surrounded by nonsense from the media. Okay. Destination addiction and the grass is greener mentality can also look like, and forgive me if this offends anybody, but it could look like this: if only I were thinner or prettier or better educated or healthier or wealthier or whatever, then I'd be happy, right? If only, if only, if only. That's what we do to ourselves. Um, it could also look like, well, I'm not really happy now, but when I finally graduate from college and I get my ideal job and I marry my soulmate and have children and make my first $1 million, well, then I will have arrived and then I'll be happy. That's destination addiction. Okay. Now, to be clear, to be clear, daydreaming is not a bad thing. All right. In fact, sometimes, daydreaming about a more positive future, envisioning, healthy change in our lives can have really good benefits. Right. It gives us hope. A psychiatrist by the name of Stuart Twemlow, he um, he often offers a range of possibilities which in light of that hard reality that we deal with aren't always possible. That's where daydreaming comes in, and that's what it does for us, right? It gives us a little hope that maybe in the moment things aren't possible, but one day, but that's a little different from destination addiction. The problem comes when we focus too much on potential blessings and possibilities in the future, and it causes us to miss the blessings that we already have, right? When we do that, what we do is we run the risk that we're kind of becoming blind to the blessings that we have today in the present, and we become kind of drunk with this wine of destination addiction, right? We become obsessed with chasing happiness, chasing the high, if you will. And what happens when we become sort of drunk with that wine of destination addiction? Well, you know, what happens is we become obsessed with this really rather bizarre idea that we'll never be truly happy until we achieve a certain goal or obtain like a certain thing or get with a certain person that seems to have everything that we want, um and maybe some things that your current spouse does not. How do you think people end up in the wrong bed, right? Let's be real. um but being drunk with the wine of destination addiction is dangerous. And there's a reason why the Bible in First Peter 5:8, it admonishes us. It says, be sober and vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Now, when people see that, they often attribute that to sobriety when it comes to alcohol and things like that. But sometimes it's sort of a metaphor, right? It's an analogy for just being sort of completely inebriated and intoxicated with the cares of this world, with things like destination addiction. It could have the same effect and the same results. Um, and when you become addicted to the destination, when the daydreams become all that you think about, it becomes really almost impossible for you to be happy or truly satisfied with anything that you may have in front of you right here, right now. And that's really sad because, most of the time when you actually do get the things that you want, the happiness becomes kind of fleeting, right? It's only momentary because you're so hamstrung by this destination addiction that the minute you start seeing flaws in this thing that you were chasing, whether it's a job or a car or a house or a person, the moment that you start seeing any sort of flaws or you start realizing that this thing isn't perfect and it isn't bringing you to this constant state of nirvana happiness that we think, we get these concepts from the world and from other sort of religions, that you're going to be in this constant state of happiness, and that's never the case. God never promised that. Jesus never promised that. um what Paul promised was that if we are thankful and if we trust in God, we can have the peace that passes understanding. He didn't say the happiness that passes understanding. He said the peace that passes understanding. Peace is something that you can have 24/7, 7 days a week if you trust in God, right? But happiness is fleeting. It's a feeling. It's a transitory emotion that'll come and that'll go depending on whether or not you slept well, whether or not you've eaten in a few hours, whatever it may be. That's why people get hangry, right? Happiness can be something that comes and goes, but peace you can have all the time. You know, um, and but what happens is as soon as people start seeing flaws in whatever it is that they've been chasing after, they say, "Oh, I was wrong. I was wrong. I know that I wanted this for so long, but I thought it would make me happy, but it didn't. So if only I had this, I know now this I know can make me happy." What an unhealthy place to be. And what's worse is when the thing that you want, the destination that you're so desperately addicted to, is totally wrong and unhealthy. At that point, then you can do some real damage to your life. Because when you get to that point, um, you're likely to start making decisions, bad decisions, out of desperation to get to that destination that you think is going to make you happy, that can absolutely destroy you. Um, we'll even do things that are clearly wrong at times, using something called situational ethics to justify our actions, because in our sort of desperate state, we start thinking things like, well, the ends justify the means, and that's never the case. It's never the case. um so what happens once we get to the destination? Well, when we have destination addiction, once we reach our destination, we're we're often too preoccupied with looking towards the next destination to really appreciate the blessing that we finally been given. Um, and it's really sad, because it's this endless cycle that we fall into of striving for happiness, but never really letting ourselves attain us. We say we just want to be happy, and that's why we have this destination addiction. And then we get to the destination, and you think, okay, well, you got what you wanted for so long. Are you happy now? And then we start looking at the next thing because we see some sort of imperfection, and now we're no longer happy. We're happy only for a fleeting moment, and now we're in that cycle again. And sometimes our destination addiction is simply because we're going through a tough time in the present, which is completely understandable, right? Anticipation is a good feeling to harness. Like if you're going through something difficult in the moment, anticipating like a blessing, having hope, that's okay, right? Um, but you know, Dr. Gaines says, while having hope for a better tomorrow is beneficial to our overall mood, it is equally beneficial to be able to reflect on the positives in the present, right? Um, and that's why destination addiction is so harmful and so dangerous. Um, in his 2011 book, The Authentic Success, um, Dr. Holden wrote this. He says, these are some signs that you have destination addiction. Um, do you live your life only to get to the end of it? Most people answer this question with a no, but everyone lives like they mean it. In the manic society that most of us experience, people exhibit a frantic, neurotic behavior that I call destination addiction. The addiction is a major block to success. Did you hear that? The addiction is a major block to success. People who suffer from destination addiction believe that success is a destination. They are addicted to the idea that the future is where success is, happiness is, and heaven is. Each passing moment is merely a ticket to get to the future. They live in the not now, they are psychologically absent, and they disregard everything that they have. Destination addiction is a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is somewhere else. We suffer literally from the pursuit of happiness. We are always on the run, on the move, and on the go. Our goal is not to enjoy the day, it is not to get through the day. We have always to get to somewhere else first before we can relax and before we can savor the moment. But we never get there. There is no point of arrival. We are permanently dissatisfied. The feeling of success is continually deferred, and we live in hot pursuit of some extraordinary bliss we have no idea how to find. Um, Holden then goes on to list some of the symptoms of destination addiction, and I've kind of reproduced them verbatim, so I'll just read them to you. He says, "Whatever you're doing, you're always thinking about what comes next." Okay, you cannot afford to stop because you always have to be somewhere else. You're always in a hurry, even when you don't need to be. You always promise that next year you'll be less busy. Your dream home is always the next home that you plan to buy. You don't like your job, but it has good prospects for the future. You never commit fully to anything in case something better comes along. We hope the next big success will finally make you happy. You always think you should be further ahead of where you are now. You have so many forecasts, projections, and targets that you never really enjoy life. And that's just, it's really a sad place to be. Um, so, what we have to understand is that, if you can't take a moment and pause, you know, and enjoy, where you are, you're oftentimes never going to be able to appreciate the blessings, and you're never going to be able to feel that momentary happiness that comes along and comes and goes in life. And so we have to, you know realize that that mindset that, oh, if I only had this, that's silly. That's a a complete misunderstanding of how life works, and that has never been promised to us, in this world, in the Bible, anywhere, right? Destination addiction is very dangerous because, it's always sort of this, happiness is in the next hit, the next high, the next acquisition, the next drink, the next, hot fudge sundae, the next 10-pound weight loss. If your mind is preoccupied with that grass is greener sort of thinking, um, you're gonna live life constantly feeling unfulfilled, depressed, and unsatisfied that you're not living the life that you would imagine in your head that you were going to be living. You know, why do we have so much depression, anxiety, and things like that in the world? It's because people, I mean, I know people that are very well off, that are wealthy, that have great careers, at doctors and lawyers and people like that, and they're miserable. Miserable. And some people think, oh, if I could just have what they have, I'd be happy. Well, these people have it and they're miserable. They're depressed. They're on medication and this and that. And I'm not saying that some people don't need those things. I mean, maybe they do. But I would venture to say that the vast majority of people who are taking antidepressants and things like that, don't need them. And maybe what they need is, some cognitive behavioral therapy where they can reframe their thoughts and get out of this grass is greener mentality and break away from the destination addiction, thinking that happiness is always somewhere other than where they are so that they can enjoy the blessings that they have in the moment. But that's the mess that we get ourselves into when we're constantly waiting for something or someone to cure our unhappiness. Um, I think what Holden is trying to promote is living in the moment, is living in the now. In other words, it's a form of mindfulness, of being mindful and being aware of the blessings that you have in your life. How many of us do that? No, no, no. What we do is we ignore every single blessing that we have, and we cry, and we have this woe is me attitude until we get this one thing that we really want or need, right? Sometimes people, I know a lot of people who are single, and they want a partner, or they long for a partner because they feel like if they only had a partner, They would be happy. And all they talk about is how sad they are and how lonely they are because they don't have a partner. And, to be frank, some people don't need partners. Some people need to be single. I'm just going to say that. But, the other thing that we don't realize is that sometimes singleness is a gift, right? It allows us to do things that we couldn't do if we were in a partnership, in a committed sort of relationship, because now we have somebody else to think about as well. And there's a reason why the Apostle Paul never got married, right? Jesus was his spouse. He was, God was, the church was his spouse. Um, and I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but for the mission that he was to carry out, that was the right move for him. So he knew that, having a spouse wasn't going to make me happy, and he knew what life was all about, and it wasn't happiness, it was peace. It was peace. And that's why in Philippians chapter 4, he talks about the peace that passes understanding. I mean, frankly, I know Paul was an extremely highly educated man, but when I read his writings, I swear Paul was a therapist, because, man, some of the things he talks about, like in Philippians chapter 4, it's really reframing. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's crazy how much of what we study today under that umbrella fits perfectly in line with what he talks about in Ephesians or in Philippians chapter 4. Um, but Another thing, another article that I have about destination addiction, um, you know, it implies almost like things like even shopping addiction are symptomatic of destination addiction. It says destination addiction is the never-ending pursuit of happiness that drives us to spend more and more money on things. But things that but things do not bring joy. They bring worry. Things bring temporary happiness that masks some deeper pain. For instance, those who consider themselves emotional spenders don't really have a spending problem. They're using shopping as a way of putting on an emotional band-aid to make some other kind of pain go away. Much in the same way, someone who overeats does so to combat depression, loneliness. It usually isn't about the enjoyment of overindulging in foods or purses. And then this article that I got from this Frugal Dad website, it's pretty cool. It says the article then goes on to describe so-called destination dealers that have helped the addiction spread quickly, like those people on television trying to sell you products that can help you totally change your life, or make you happier than you've ever been or ever dreamed possible. You ever see like beer commercials? They never show people depressed, fat, miserable in a bar drinking a beer, right? It's always people, good looking, fit people in a bathing suit at a party on a sunny day running around. And that's not true. That is never the case, right? Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's a far different story. But they sell you on this idea that if you only had this, you could be happy just like these people. Um, you look at things like cars, for example. Cars are often depicted as like a path to a happier life. Um, and you know it's almost like as if the well-built navigation system and the all the little bells and whistles and the push button ignition and all that stuff is going to make you happier than the $600 monthly payment that you're going to be paying for that thing. um but what happens is we get hooked at a very early age, and we chase these various destinations our entire lives, you know and that's why advertisers are, I mean, a lot of those advertisements are very evil in the way that they condition us, and they help facilitate and feed destination addiction. A bigger home, a newer car, fancier clothing, more exquisite jewelry. Nothing is ever good enough. Nothing is ever just simply enough, right? Um, but fortunately, I believe that there's an excellent home remedy for destination addiction. It's often hard to find, okay? But when we declare ourselves to be content, with what we have and with who we are, we can and we will beat destination addiction or the addiction of waiting to be happy. Like you got to look around and take some inventory of what's going on. What do they say? Count your blessings, not your problems, right? Um, because here's the reality: we can live very happily right now. We don't have to wait. We can live happily right now. Um, and you know, through contentment, through peace. Like what did Paul say? He said, um, I have learned that whatsoever state I am in, therewith to be content. All right. He understood that being content and being at peace is the most important thing. Being happy with whatever you have, good or bad, right? That's the secret to happiness. Okay. Learning to be content. Many of us don't understand that. Um, but we can be happy with, the house that we have. We can be happy with the car that we have, the clothes that we have. And when you do those things, you can beat that craving for more. Because happiness, quite frankly, comes from within. It's really not something that can be pursued. And this is one of the reasons why we often fail in personal relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and things like that, is because we look to somebody else to make us happy. Nobody can make you happy. Nobody. They can try as hard as they possibly could ever want to. They could do everything that you say you need somebody that is going to be in that position as a friend or a romantic partner, spouse, whatever, to do, and you will still be unhappy because nobody can make you happy. You can only become happy when you look around and appreciate all the things that you have, when you look around and appreciate all the blessings that you have. You can only become happy when you learn to find the peace that passes understanding and you are content. That's where happiness comes from. But we make the mistake that thinking that happiness is an outward, exterior thing that comes from things and people. Um, there's another article by a woman named Connie Mann, and she says this: happiness never comes from a destination. Happiness is a choice that we make every day, no matter where we are. It comes from recognizing that circumstances don't bring happiness, things don't bring happiness, achievements don't bring happiness. Happiness comes from inside of us. It's an attitude of thanksgiving. If we get too focused on tomorrow, we can fall into a dangerous trap. What did Paul say in Philippians chapter 4? He said something very poignant, and it falls right in line with this. He says, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. It perfectly echoes what Connie Mann just said, right? Happiness comes from inside us with an attitude of thanksgiving. If we get too focused on tomorrow, we can fall into a dangerous trap. Why do you think in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and I will sup with him and he with me. In other words, Jesus is saying, I want to come in. Because if I'm in there, if I'm knocking at the door to your heart, you let me in and I can come in, as long as I'm inside, I can be that source of happiness. Because happiness only comes from within. And I personally believe that when God is within, that's the ultimate origin and source of happiness. And I believe that's what Jesus was trying to teach us. She goes on, or another article I have, it's a woman, Toya Sheree. It claimed that social media and an era of excess made a major contribution to the epidemic of destination addiction. She also said, um, in line with some of the other comments that I've mentioned above, none of us are immune to destination addiction. And we all have times where we have to convince ourselves that better times are ahead, that just to make it through the day. But the key to defeating destination addiction is to find happiness in the life that you have and to achieve the goals that are important to you, not to people you think uh, will be impressed, by what you do, and not the ones that you think will impress everyone else. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about the goals that are important to you. Okay? You have to find happiness in the life that you have and achieve the goals that are important to you. Um, you know, because being at peace with your life, it really starts with just kind of zeroing in on the present and making an effort to be more content with your circumstances. Like I said, count your blessings, not your problems. um it's all perspective. What do they say? I've heard it said, it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. Right. Life is about perspective. Instead of focusing on what you don't have and what's going wrong, let's focus on what you do have and what's going right. Because even if the only thing that you can say is I opened my eyes this morning, that's better than most people. There are many people who were not able to do that today. So you open your eyes today, you got breath going through your lungs, blood pumping through your heart. What a blessing. It's another day that you can grow closer to God and that you can be a blessing to other people. So what is happiness? Just to be clear before we end. Um, can you recall the last time that you truly felt content? Um, when was it? Was it, when you were gazing up at a starry sky on a warm summer night? Was it in the presence of loved ones? Was it while petting a dog or a cat, lounging in a hammock, beneath the shade of an oak tree or something? Um, in that moment was, where there was like nowhere else that you'd rather be, or nothing else that you'd rather be doing. You know, um, what was it about, those moments, right? um why is it that in those moments you feel happiness? Because true happiness comes from being in the moment and being aware of all the blessings that God has given you in the here and now. Happiness is not a destination, it's a realization. You understand me? Happiness is not a destination, it is a realization. And if many of us could stop focusing on all the things that we don't have and being envious of others and things like, because look, let's be real. A lot of us, we may not admit it, but sometimes we're envious of other people. We're envious of their jobs, their financial situation, their houses. We're envious of their spouses, right? But the reality is if we stop focusing on all that stuff and focus on the blessings that we have, we'll be we'll be quite thankful. Because again, happiness is not a destination, it's a realization. Happiness is breathing air. It's looking at your surrounding. It's listening to the sounds of the earth. It's feeling your feet roll off the ground when you walk. It's recognizing that you're alive. What a blessing. All of the other things that we want in life, they're just fillers, right? Um, but the reality of the situation is that destination addiction is the killer of that happiness, and we have to avoid falling into that trap. So how do we avoid falling into destination addiction? Here's my first suggestion: set intentions for what you want, and whether it's sustained recovery, healthy nurturing relationships, vibrant well-being, spiritual connection, financial abundance, whatever it be, set intentions for what you want. But don't become so obsessed with these things um that if you don't have them, you can no longer enjoy the present blessings that you have. um you know Take some inspired action to bring those things, into being, rather than complaining that they're not a part of your daily reality, right? It's okay. If you have a goal, that's good. There's nothing wrong with setting goals, having hope, right? That's a good thing. And so make a decision to take some action to make those things come to pass. But don't complain just because they haven't become a reality yet, because that's silly. That is such a waste of energy. The next thing is, surround yourself with people who support and encourage your vision while grounding you in the present. Okay. The next one, don't put off happiness while you're waiting for the seed you planted to grow. Um, because sometimes the happiness is in the process, right? The blessing is in the process. Eckhart Tolle, he says in one of his books, um, people spend their whole life waiting to start living. Don't be one of those people. Um, and creating a right here, right now list, I think, is always good. Let's look at a right here, right now list. Okay. Um, Things that are bringing you joy right here, right now. The lessons that you're learning right here, right now. What is it about you that you love about yourself right here, right now? What strides are you making right here, right now to help accomplish your goals? That's what we need to do. Make that right here, right now list so we can focus on the blessings. Could be, man, my new lifting weights bring me joy right here, right now. My lovely wife brings me joy right here, right now. These lessons that I'm learning in school and finance and whatever, it brings me joy. The things that I'm learning in Bible study bring me joy right here, right now. Focus on these things, and when you do, um, you know, the future can look far brighter because the present looks so much more beautiful. So, the purpose of this is to observe all the daily occurrences in your life, and in your story, so that you can appreciate everything that God has given you and not fall into the trap of destination addiction, because destination addiction is ultimately the happiness killer. So, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this talk about destination addiction. I hope that you will keep destination addiction from stealing your joy and be able to enjoy the blessings that you have right now, right here, right now, and count your blessings, not your problems. Take care, folks.